Welcome to the Rempel Garner podcast.
Hello, fellow patriots. Sean and I are back after our self-imposed election hiatus, and we've got a lot to talk about today. We're going to quickly run through some post-election analysis, what we expect to see when Parliament returns in just a couple of short weeks. And we're also going to go through what you can expect to see as Parliament returns and some of the priorities that the Conservative Party might be focusing on. But we're going to start with a big thank you to the electors of Calgary Nose Hill. I'm joined today by my campaign manager, veteran political strategist, Sean Schnell. That was a 5-week bull ride, huh?
It was not particularly a long campaign, I guess, in number of days, but it sure was a ride, like you said, and it was intense, maybe is the right word to use.
It was. I mean, we had a great result. So it was
Hmm.
our fifth election campaign with my name on the ballot and you running my campaign. Um, Great results. We had close to 60% of the vote, so a real mandate from the community, and it's quite something to receive a mandate like that. It really does ground you in the gravity of the situation. You and I went back and forth several times. I mean, there's been a lot of post-election analysis that's been done, so I don't want to, rehash all of that. But I think it was pretty clear within our community what the ballot question was.
Yeah, I think so too. I think that we saw a couple of things emerge early on in the campaign, and then continue right through until election day when it came down to things like affordability and
Yeah.
concerns around crime. Those were prevailing topics that came up door after door after door. And I think that, like you said, there's been a lot of political analysis that has been done, a lot by people that have no idea what they're talking about and didn't knock
Exactly.
on a particular and knock on a single door or make a phone call or talk to anybody outside of a television studio. So you can take that commentary for what it's worth, but there will be a lot, I think, dissected and talked about in the coming weeks and months as people unpack exactly what happened and why in the election. But for us, like you said, the ballot question emerged very early on and continued to, I think, pick up intensity as we grew closer to election day.
Just sort of two observations that I don't really think have been made sufficiently in analysis of the election. The first was, you'll hear a lot of political strategists talk about archetypical voters for any particular political party. So by that, I mean, when you go to the door, there's an archetype of a voter that is accessible to you and your political party and what their issues are. And in this election, I do think that the types of archetypes of voters that were accessible to us as a political party were broader than they
Mm.
were in previous elections. For me, going to the door, doing all of our election analysis, our electoral outreach, without sort of spoiling what the secret sauce of our campaigns are. I know that we picked up NDP vote in this campaign. You know that. Younger voters, more working class voters, but we still maintained a broad coalition of people that we had in the past. And um, the one point that I want to make that I don't think has been made enough is that for those voters, the issue was a mix or both of affordability and crime. And we heard
Mhm.
it in different ways on different doors. And our party leader, our campaign leadership was under an enormous amount of pressure from just, again, I won't get into all the sausage making behind the scenes, but a lot of pundits who weren't knocking on doors or had other interests than our political party forming government. He was under an enormous amount of pressure. I was under an enormous amount of pressure to stop talking about those issues. And I think that if we had stopped talking about those issues and had not maintained that discipline, we wouldn't have seen that broad voter coalition that we received. So, I want to thank you, Sean, for your discipline because managing me as a candidate sometimes is a tall order. But I think that it took a lot of discipline to really both listen to the needs of the community, build that voter coalition, and Now we have to deliver on our promises for everybody in the community, not just people that voted Conservative. But certainly those issues were what we heard over and over again.
Yeah,
So,
I would agree with that, and I would say this was a unique election in that I think we found voters to be very engaged and what is often classified as like high information voters from early on in the campaign is people were dialed in very quickly and aware of the issues and aware of the leaders and the topics and the conversations right from the word go almost. And that was interesting. And so yeah, congratulations to you and your colleagues. You've got a large task ahead of you. There's been a lot of talk, I think, about the Liberals and Carney, which I know we'll get into, but Conservatives have a large mandate and a lot to be proud of and a lot of work to do ahead of this next session of Parliament.
so let's move on that point. We have to saddle up right away. Parliament's about to return. And when you talk about the ballot question, particularly for the people that we received a mandate from, being affordability and crime, there's some pretty startling data that has come out, particularly since the end of the election. I'm just going to get you to flick that one screenshot that we talked about. It was an article that was published in the National Post a couple days after the election finished, and it was Canada's economy is on track to miss forecast as it shrinks in February and stalls in March. The subheader there is first quarter growth expected to be 1.5% lower than the Bank of Canada predicted. So, essentially that's a fancy way of saying what major analysts have already been talking about, which is that there's a lot of data that suggests that Canada's economy might already be in a recession. The problem, though, is that there's still inflationary data. There's been inflationary data that's come out since the election as well, particularly on food. Food inflation continues to grow. So you've got the economy shrinking, but inflation growing. And again, this is a potential stagflationary situation that Canada's in, and that's really bad for both affordability, job security, and long-term economic growth. At the same time, we've also seen major analysts, credit rating analysts like Fitch, say that should Mark Carney actually push through his deficit spending that he announced in the election, that Canada's credit rating might be further downgraded, which would lead to an increase in borrowing costs. And on top of all of that, when you look at all of those issues combined, the Bank of Canada is uncertain about what to do with interest rates. So, all of that together is really, for me, where Conservatives need to be focusing their efforts as Parliament returns. What is the actual state of Canada's finances? Getting real data on economic projections, on how the government intends to pay for their massive spending commitments that they put forward in the election, and then also crime. This is one area that Mark Carney during the campaign I felt was really weak. You could tell it's not his wheelhouse. Um, there's these two big baskets of issues that we have to get into right away as soon as Parliament returns. The Liberals will have to table a budget, but Conservatives are going to have to litigate some of these issues, because if Canada is in a potential recession already, if we are still seeing inflation at the same time, that really strikes to the heart of what we heard on the doors as in terms of concerns from voters. So, now that we're switching from campaign mode back to policy mode, this is something we're going to have to focus on right away.
Yeah, well, and there's a significant basket of work to do there on behalf of Canadians. Parliament has not been sitting, as people
Yep.
know, for a long period of time at the choice of the previous Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, and quite frankly, at the choice of Mark Carney as well, who chose to go into an election campaign as opposed to recall Parliament. And so there's a lot of work to do. There are tools that parliamentarians like yourself and your colleagues have not had access to examine and look at the spending and the announcements that the Liberals have been making for months now, and looking at with a pretty intense eye on the promises that they are making and the budget that they will inevitably put before Parliament, and to look at what the ramifications of the policies that they're putting forward are going to be on the lives of Canadians. Canadians have been waiting in this sort of purgatory for Parliament to resume so that they can have these issues of affordability around housing, around the cost of food, groceries, and like you said, around the issue around crime to be dealt with. People's lives have continued regardless of the politics that different individuals have sort of thrust the country into. And so there's really serious challenges that need to be looked at immediately. It will be nice that those tools of Parliament will be back available to opposition members to be able to examine and hold the government to account, and provide a level of transparency and accountability that I think Canadians voted for in this last election.
You're absolutely right. Like, just without getting into the weeds, it's worth reminding Canadians that the public accounts were 9 months late under the Liberals last year. We only had, I think, one committee meeting where we had 5 minutes, a 5-minute question round with departmental officials on this massive amount of public spending that hasn't been scrutinized. And it's things like that that the Parliament is going to have to get down to business on right away. I think we got some indication of where the Liberals are headed with the announcement of Mark Carney's cabinet. So why don't we break down that a little bit, from a conservative perspective? Uh, Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre did hold a brief press conference on this. We can talk about some of his comments here today. But the first thing that really struck me, um, I was actually surprised at how little the front bench of the Liberal government changed from Justin Trudeau's government. I really thought I thought Carney was going to change the senior economic portfolios for sure. This is Justin Trudeau's cabinet, so I want to be optimistic that there will be a change in tone, particularly on inflationary spending, but that front bench looked a lot the same as what Justin Trudeau's did.
Yeah, well, and I mean, this is why sayings like "talk is cheap"
Yeah.
are relevant, right? Is they can say whatever they want, but actions speak louder than words. And so the campaign is over, and like you said, you look to the direction that the government is putting out there now, and they will have a record now that they will begin to establish as Parliament returns. But it starts with this cabinet making, and
Yep.
the Prime Minister has made a choice now twice to stick with the same team that quite frankly got us into the messes that we are talking about the unaffordability of housing, around the crime crisis, around the situation that Canada finds itself in economically in relation to the tariffs and the global economic situation. So here we are again, like you said, with the same front bench being asked to continue the legacy that Justin Trudeau and his group of advisors and ministers had. And so we shall see very soon if we see anything different. But I don't think Canadians should be holding their breath on that, because it sure looks the same. And I think that we can expect to see a lot of the same direction and types of policies coming out of the same individuals.
So Pierre Poilievre, he was fairly magnanimous in his press conference. I'll give him credit for that. I will be less magnanimous, but so Pierre, he said, we are, as conservatives, we're going to work with the government when they put forward good ideas that are in the best interests of Canadians, but we're going to oppose them when they don't. And I think that's the right approach. But I want to drill down a little bit into some of your, I don't want to say pessimism, but maybe realism is the way to describe. I mean, okay, so he's got Carney has Francois Philippe Champagne in as finance minister. He didn't change Champagne out of finance. And there was some speculation that he was going to bring a couple of new MPs that Carney had recruited into the role who have some senior business experience, but he didn't. He chose, and Champagne, I mean, like he made some pretty highly suspect decisions as industry minister, as finance minister. Um, I thought, to me, that was a signal that there's not going to be a significant change, particularly on inflationary spending from this government. You've got Sean Fraser, who said that he wanted to spend more time with his family and wasn't going to run, and then decided to run. And they've, he objectively, Sean was not a good immigration minister. This was the guy that bragged about juicing Canada's things like temporary student visas to levels, unheard of levels where we didn't have, places to house students. There was stories of students living under bridges and impacted housing across the country. Then he moved on to the actual housing portfolio, which obviously is still a mess. And now he's put him in justice. And it's like, okay, well, you've got a guy who has arguably had a very bad track record in two previous portfolios. You're now putting him in the justice file when crime's a huge issue. Like, come on, man. You've got Stephen Guilbeault, who, really radical far left environmentalist who was the architect of a lot of policies that stymied natural resource development in Canada and arguably eroded our sovereignty. He's now in charge of Canadian identity at a time where there is concern about national unity in different parts of the country. We'll get into that in a minute. And, can I just like, can I fin? No, I want to do a rant specifically on Melanie Joly, but I know you had some comments on these, on Gregor Robertson, the mayor of Vancouver, being in the housing minister now. Like, this to me does not say change in tone.
No,
Like,
no, and again, these are choices now that Mark Carney has to be held accountable for. These are individuals that, like, I mean, in the case of Sean Fraser, I think the term Pierre used was failing upward. This is an individual who has really been a disaster at every portfolio that he has touched to date, but yet continues to be shuffled around and promoted for inexplicable reasons. And it's a bit of I think, a mystery to Canadians how some of these ministers can have done such a bad job, but yet continue to be put into their positions. I know many people were texting in some of my group chats saying, if I did as bad as these ministers,
yes,
that I wouldn't be expecting a promotion. I'd be
right?
expecting a pink slip. And so it's a bit it's a bit unusual. I think it's frustrating to Canadians that we're watching throughout a campaign, that we're promised change, and then you come out on the other side of it and it's more of the same. And so, yeah, I don't think people need to be pessimistic. I think that they can use common sense and look at this and say, like, our expectations for change are low because these individuals, some of them have been there for 10 years, and why expect something to be different after 10 years? I think the expectation is that we'll see more of the same. And so, like you said, like there was an opportunity with new individuals, fresh faces, with new CVs coming in, and may disagree with the approach, the overall policy approach, but to have new faces in the cabinet, and the choice was made to leave the senior individuals around the cabinet table as the same. People like leaving Chrystia Freeland and, like you said,
Great point.
Champagne, and yeah, we can get to Joly, but there didn't seem to be much accountability for those that were so disastrous in their files.
So let's talk about Julie, and then let's talk about what all of this sort of same old might suggest for how Carney is going to actually govern. So Jolie, I think, is an interesting case because a lot of the gossip has been that she's always wanted the industry portfolio, but really hasn't articulated. You hear that, right? Like, you and I have heard that she's wanted the industry portfolio, but you've never heard why, right? Like, or what she wanted to do, or what her policy knowledge on the area has been. I've served as the industry critic before. I've served on the industry committee for many years. I, have a background in some of the areas of industry portfolio. I've served as an economic minister in Stephen Harper's government. And I've never heard Melanie really talk about any of these issues. Like, and they're complicated, sensitive files that really strike at the heart of what Canada needs to do to make itself more resilient in the face of economic shocks and economic threats, right? So, like I'm thinking of things like the broadband file, competition laws, looking at some of the oligopolies in the country, intellectual property protection and how we retain intellectual property in Canada. What are the role of universities and trade institutions in the country as, looking 10 years out with the economy, internal trade, whether or not all the spending that goes through the industry department is acceptable. Like there's been major scandals in this file, looking at small, medium-sized enterprise and like regulatory burdens, attracting foreign direct investment, open banking. I mean, I could go on and on. I could do a podcast just on this file. And to have somebody who, like, arguably, many people would say Melanie Joly was not a successful foreign affairs minister. She hasn't had a lot of high-profile successes. In fact, she's had arguably more failures as a cabinet minister, a senior Trudeau lieutenant, much farther left on her policy thinking. To just plop her in there, to me sends it sends one of two messages to me. It's either he's comfortable having somebody who is not familiar with on a significant file be in that file, or that he's going to use the sort of Trudeau era um, management style of trying to manage everything through the PMO with staff that aren't necessarily in tune with the electorate or aren't in tune with the electorate. And to me, like we can't have that. We're at a juncture where we're really talking about Canada's economic sovereignty right now. And you've got like Guilbeault, Joly, Champagne, who they were the guys at the table who came up with the Trudeau mess that Carney was advising on. And so to me, it said no change. And if we are in a recession, let's say that that's what the data shows, or certainly in a period of deeply stagnant growth, having these people carry forward a Justin Trudeau mandate, I mean, like that is not going to signal to investors and different companies, like job creators, let's do business in Canada right now, right? It's going to send the opposite message. And I was shocked today, Sean, that he didn't. I was really shocked that he kept that front bench looking as similar as he did.
Yeah, and so I mean, I think Canadians rightly should look at this with skepticism as to the reasons why these decisions are being made, and I think that we have seen over and over again as of late that the Liberals put their politics ahead of people and good
Do you
policy,
think
and
this is
so
about internal politics? Like, do you think this
I,
is about Carney having to like satisfy egos as opposed to like actually
well,
getting an economic agenda done? Like that's an
yeah, I
interesting
mean,
observation.
this is he's never really been accused of being a sophisticated political operator because he's fairly new to politics, and so I think that it should be looked at with some level of skepticism that there probably is some level of politics and inner circle kind of gamesmanship going on here, and it does make you wonder how much of this is his stamp versus some of the internal players are saying this is how it's going to be and you're going to continue kind of the direction that we've been going, and by not seeing a lot of shift in the front bench, it's hard to argue that's what's happening. Is the same players are there, the same people are calling the shots, and I don't expect that we'll see much difference, even though
Yeah.
we
I
have a new prime minister at the moment, but it sure seems as if we don't. We have the same government in place.
Well, I saw this interesting tweet. I think it was Sean Spear at the Hub. He tweeted something to the effect of Mark Carney might be the first Liberal prime minister that campaigned on the right and governed on the left. I think that, Occam's razor, the easiest, simplest explanation for keeping Champagne, Joly, Freeland, and Fraser, like the core team of Trudeau in place is like this is him. He is like he tried to sort of come across as the safe centrist to a certain set of voters in the election, but he's keeping this far left front bench on the key economic files. So to me, the simplest explanation is this is a guy that is going to govern on the far left, that is going to increase the deficits, that isn't going to necessarily be in touch with the average Canadian voter who said, I can't afford to live. And again, like if he is not willing to do that, then there is a role. Obviously, there's a role for conservatives to constructively litigate that, as Pierre Poilievre said in his press conference today, steal our ideas.
Hmm.
But oh man, okay,
Yeah,
I'm repeating myself here, but it was
yeah.
I don't think it was good optics for him.
Well,
I was shocked.
and there's two thoughts that I have on that is if that's truly what happens here, and again, I have to kind of take it as for what it is that we're seeing here is not much change. I think there very will quickly be a sense of buyer's remorse from the country as it relates to this Liberal government. And the second part is conservatives have been given a mandate to hold this government to account and to do that from a position of strength as it relates to the issues we've already talked about, like affordability and on crime. That was very clear, and so I think the government, there may be all kinds of politics and internal sort of decision making that is going on, but they'll have to tread carefully because we have a stable opposition that is coming in with a mandate from Canadians, a very large increased mandate from
Yes.
Canadians to say, here is what we want to see happen as far as change, real change. And I think that if they do not adhere to the messages that were being sent by Canadians in the election, they'll find themselves on the wrong side of public opinion pretty quickly.
Can we talk about who wasn't in cabinet? Because I think
Yeah,
that's interesting.
that's interesting as well.
So, I was shocked that he didn't have somebody in a senior economic file from Western Canada. I mean, like that would have been an easy way to sort of quell um, well-founded concerns about his government's seriousness to address or willingness to address legitimate irritants that have plagued Western Canada for some time. Um, Pierre Poilievre was asked about some of these issues in his press conference today, and he said, look, for example, he addressed Alberta directly. He said Alberta has very legitimate concerns about the federal government, its treatment by the federal government. He listed off several areas, including energy infrastructure projects that have been scuttled. Where was the Western Canadian minister? Like, why wasn't the finance minister from Western Canada? Why wasn't the industry minister from Western Canada? Why wasn't the natural resources minister from Western Canada? When you look across the prairie provinces into Alberta, there was none of those front bench positions went to Western Canadians. And I find that really concerning. I don't know if you want to get into Alberta and our issue in Calgary,
Yeah, I
but
mean it's
there's one
concerning.
observation to be made there.
Sure. I mean, it's concerning, but not surprising to me, I guess, either. It's because that's who they are. This is how they have treated Alberta and Western Canada for years, and so I don't expect to see anything different from them. Yeah, as you're alluding to, there, it wasn't as if they didn't have choices to make there. They have seats from the West. In particular, they won one seat in Calgary, and it was a noticeable absence today when
It
they
was.
announced cabinet.
I
That
kind of figured that guy wasn't
Yeah.
going to be in cabinet because he put out this sort of, I guess, like Substack that clearly had not been vetted by the PMO. You and I have been through. We've seen this movie a few times. You
Hmm.
can kind of tell when comms have been vetted or approved, and I'm like, oh, so I wonder if he's this him putting out this piece. I was like, I don't think this guy's in cabinet. It surprised me. But it wasn't just Calgary. I don't. Do you want to check? I don't think Winnipeg got a cabinet minister, right? Even though they were Liberals, I don't think they have a cabinet minister from Winnipeg.
No.
That's that's shocking to me. So, and also in any of his press conferences, but certainly in the composition of his cabinet, Carney did not send a signal that he was looking at addressing some of these issues. And for me, if somebody's listening to this from, let's say, the Greater Toronto area and is going like, well, why is this important? Somebody who's not necessarily part of the political discourse every day was like, well, why does this matter? Well, we're at a juncture where, we've just had certainly Canada's economic sovereignty challenged by the current American administration. This was a concern that was raised as a core part of the Liberal campaign. So the best way to protect Canada's economic sovereignty is to directly address particularly economic, like the low-hanging fruit or economic irritants from a highly regionalized economy. So, you had Carney come out in the middle of the campaign and say that he wouldn't repeal Bill C-69, the No More Pipelines bill. To not even have a voice at the senior table, the day-to-day table. I know that there's some ministers of state or whatever, secretaries of state, but my understanding is they're not going to be part of the day-to-day discourse from Western Canada that is tasked with an economic file. Was I don't know, like, do you think it was purposeful? Do you think it was like he was
Yes.
trying to stick it? You do?
Yes, I do.
That makes me sad.
I do.
Like, you know,
I think it's intentional.
you
I
know,
don't think it's an oversight. I don't think. I mean, because again, you have to look at history here and their record. They have a record on this. They continue to operate in the same way, and so at some point you have to look and say this is just kind of who they are. And so I think again, it elevates the importance of voices like yours and your colleagues that are coming out of those regions to make sure that the voices of
yeah.
people and workers and industry are elevated and heard within the halls of power, to make sure that people understand that just because you don't want to put a voice around the table doesn't mean that there won't be voices that are elevated within the discourse. And so I think that's the responsibility and the charge that your constituents and the constituents of your colleagues have been given, is to make sure that they hear those issues and that they aren't lost in the shuffle of what's going on in Ottawa. But yeah, I'm unsurprised at this point, and I take it for really what it is. It's a choice. They make this choice time and time again, and so here we are once again, where you've got another Liberal government that has decided to not elevate a voice into one of those senior economic roles at a time where there is unity issues across the country, and at a time when we have these economic strains and challenges that really should be putting the politics aside and allowing us to have these conversations in a more wholesome way.
And this was what you just, like, the sort of macro context that you just described. I was glad that was how the Conservative Party comported itself on this issue during the campaign, and then continued in terms of content and tone in Pierre's press conference today. So by that, I mean being very precise about what the concerns of Western Canada are, and then offering concrete solutions on how to address
Mhm.
them, right? So for example, energy infrastructure. We need to get rid of uh, barriers to investment, needless barriers to investment, which preclude projects that meet environmental standards, um, uh, duty to consult standards from being built in a timely way, because that not only benefits the Western Canadian economy, it benefits the entire Canadian economy. It gives us energy sovereignty. It gives us energy security. Going through those issues with a concise plan is exactly what we did during the campaign. And then again, this was reflected again in the tone of the response by Mr. Polyev in the press conference today. And that gave me heart, because it's like, okay, look, the tone is very clear. What we said as a party during the election is how we are going to comport ourselves in the House. We have a mandate. I'm a Western Canadian MP, I'm an Albertan MP, so of course I'm going to stand up for the interests of my constituents in the House. I'm also going to stand up for the interests of the country in that context, right? And standing up for the interests of my constituents, particularly on energy, on inflationary spending, on some of these these big irritant issues that you hear over and over again. It's in the best interest of Canadian sovereignty for the government to solve them. So, I thought Pierre's, again, his answer was magnanimous, but mine is going to be, just perhaps, um, a little bit more emphatic in that, um, underscoring the need for the Liberal government to be really inclusive in its attention to these issues. I um and I hope that they're not I'm going to be more optimistic than you. I have to be. I hope that they're not playing with fire on this. We'll see what's in the throne speech in a couple of weeks. But if this Liberal government, they campaigned, they wanted, they were talking about Canadian economic sovereignty and whatnot. Elbows up means elbows up for the whole country, for every region of the country, and those voices need to be heard. So I think that'll be a big area of focus for a lot of folks as the throne speech comes out. But do you want to talk a little bit about what happens next in a couple of weeks? Maybe we should do another episode on this in a week just to explain the return of
Yeah, that's not
Parliament
a
because
bad
it's a
idea,
longer
actually.
topic.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, I can maybe let's just do a quick look ahead for folks so that they understand um, what's happening. So Parliament will return on it's Monday, May 25th, correct?
The 26th.
26. So there will be the first thing that has to happen. And again, I'm going to paraphrase and go quickly through everything, but the Speaker of the House of Commons has to be elected.
Hmm.
Then there has to be a speech from the throne. King Charles will be coming to Canada to open Parliament, which is actually a monumental occasion. But in terms of like looking at what the government's priority items are, what is going to be in that speech from the throne is going to be something that Conservatives are going to have to focus on right away. But also, as you said on the front end of the show today, also what's in their budget. You talked about prorogation. Uh, Without getting into all the technicalities of this, the long and the short of it is the government is way overdue for a budget. It has to deliver a federal budget, and it has to pass that federal budget in order for the government to keep functioning. And that's going to make for a very intense parliamentary session. I'm looking forward to getting back to work. But I think that Canadians, there's going to be pressure that needs to be put on the Liberal government to ensure that they're thinking about the economic interest of every part of the country, that they're being inclusive, that they're addressing regional irritants. And they're aware of the fact that they didn't gain a majority government. They didn't. They're in a minority situation, and they need to understand that they are going to need the support of opposition parties, to people from other parts of the country in order to pass their budget. And the way that they can show goodwill is by understanding that as much as they had a big mandate, so did we. Conservative Party had a historic result. I think it was 24, 25 new seats all across the country, and we're a rejuvenated. I know a lot of my colleagues I've talked to, they're ready. They're ready to get back in the saddle, and the government is going to have to address the concerns of the 8 million people who did not vote for them and voted
Yeah.
for Conservatives.
Yeah, well, and I think Canadians are ready to see that. They've heard a lot of talk out of the Liberals and out of Mark Carney for the last number of months, and now it's time to actually, like you said, get down to the actual hard work of governing. And they're going to have to figure out a way to do that within the context of a minority parliament and with the support of opposition parties, like you said, official opposition that has increased both in popular vote and seats. And so that is the reality that they're entering into. They've got a long list of to-dos to
Yep.
get done, a short period of time to do it before summer, and people's lives have continued to be a challenge in the midst of prorogation and in the midst of a political campaign. So I think people have heard enough talk. They want to see some action now. And that's really where we find ourselves going into in the next couple of weeks here as Parliament resumes. And I think it's a good idea to unpack some of the ins and outs that are happening as they do. But I think that is the high level of expectations that Canadians have now as Parliament comes back is
As they should.
what are you going to get down and do now?
As they should. We talked over and over again in the campaign about restoring the promise of Canada, that if you work hard, you can afford a home in a safe neighborhood. That to me is something that's the mandate we received in the campaign. And I know that that's what Conservatives are going to be getting down to business. But like you said, there's a lot of work to do, and we'll be working very hard to get that done. And coming to you with more information on this podcast. If there are questions that you, as our listeners, would like us to answer, over the next few weeks as Parliament resumes. It's going to be a very busy session. Drop a note in the comments. If you're listening to this on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, don't forget to hit auto download so that you don't miss an episode now that Sean and I are back in the saddle. And also, if you are watching this on YouTube or any other channel, click subscribe so that we can stay in touch with you. I'm sure we're going to have to do an episode on the Liberals' threat to reinstate some of the censorship bills. That's something that we're definitely going to have to keep an eye on. But certainly we would ask that you click subscribe so that no matter what the Liberals do in that regard, we can continue to get you the information from the House of Commons and our work on a lot of these issues. Stay tuned, click subscribe, working hard for you. Have a great day.
Thanks for listening. If you want even more political news, subscribe at michellerempelgarner.substack.com. And if you like what you hear, be sure to share this podcast.